Hello and welcome to this special edition of FANVERSATION. I have a very special guest with me this way. There we go. I have director Jim Batt, who is part of an exciting short film that will be at Comic-Con. So all you Comic-Con folk, you should be listening up. And everybody else, guess what? It'll be available later. The film is The Grave of Saint Oran. So thank you so much for joining me, Jim.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, briefly tell me about the film, and then how did you get involved with it?
Yeah, so the film is called The Grave of Saint Oran, and it's based on a Neil Gaiman poem, a quite short poem called In Rayleigh Oran, which is basically translates to the graveyard of Saint Oran. And yeah, it's a stop motion animation or paper cutouts. So it's like watercolor illustrations, then animated painstakingly, frame by frame. And it tells the tale of two saints who sail to the island of Iona and try and build a chapel there. But things don't really go according to plan, and the ritual murder of one saint by another kind of leads to a chain of events that will bring into question everything they believe in and kind of their entire understanding of the world. So yeah, it's kind of it's a nice mix between sort of mythology and history, and at its core is kind of just like a nice spooky ghost story.
Nice. And then how did you
And
get involved with this project?
yeah, that's a great question. It's been a while in the works for me now, but I think it was probably about 7 years ago now. I had heard Neil give a reading of it at one of his events that he did. And at the time, it was an unpublished poem, but it kind of just got stuck in my head. It was like this very good tempo, I think, for animation and the strange kind of imagery and themes that it has, and this sort of very haunting atmosphere. And so I had heard it then and was finishing up some projects, and when I was looking for my next kind of short film project to sink my teeth into, that just kept coming to mind. And I was lucky enough that I have some mutual friends with Neil, so we've kind of met a few times. And so I reached out and was like, hey, how would you feel about me kind of doing an adaptation of this? And at the time it was unpublished, so I was like, okay, maybe there's not too much competition, not too many other people chasing for this poem. And he'd seen some of my earlier work, which was definitely helped. So he was excited about it, and yeah, so with his support, we did a Kickstarter, and that was what allowed us to get the funding. So lots of very generous support from community of Neil Gaiman fans, and so that went really well, and that got us together the funds that we could then put together a little team and shoot the animation.
Nice. And then how did this style of animation get chosen as this is how we're going to tell this story? Because it's very cool. You see this still image, you don't quite know what to expect, but then how you see it move is so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting, like you say, like looking at the stills looks very much like a panel from a comic book or something. And so I think it is interesting. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I hope people don't think that it's going to be like cell animation or like, this very, because the approach we took is my previous couple of animations had been paper cutouts as well. So I was familiar working with paper cutouts. And one of the things that I really like about that, like I really like stop motion animation because it kind of, to me, captures this very particular atmosphere of like things coming to life. And I really like the old style stop motion animation, like the Bolix brothers, like Tom Thumb and things like that, where it's like you can kind of see the hands of the animators at work. You see little thumbprints on things and everything's kind of a little bit wobbly. And so I really like that sort of handcrafted feel of that form of animation. And so I knew I wanted to do stop motion animation. And then the really great thing about working with paper cutouts I've found is it allows you to team up with illustrators. So you can work with people who aren't necessarily trained as animators. So Ellen Barkin was actually the first person I brought onto the team, and that's she did all of the drawings in the film. So she's this amazing Swedish illustrator, classically trained, who can kind of draw in any style we discovered. But I felt like this kind of delicate watercolor kind of palette really suited the environment, and she'd done some drawings. Like one of the challenges is that the island of Iona it's very stark landscape. It's just like lots of rocky kind of hills and ocean and things like that. So we knew we needed something that could kind of bring to life that haunted atmosphere. And so her work really captured that. And so, yeah, she would basically do full illustrations from my thumbnail. So I storyboarded the whole film, and then would send each scene, I would send her the storyboards, and then she would do an illustration of that and send it back. because we were working remotely because she was in Sweden. It was more of a novelty at the time. It's now something that everyone's very used to.
I was going to say the benefits of technology. Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, so she would send back these, beautiful watercolor illustrations of the scene, and we would break those down in Photoshop into separate layers. So we would kind of go, oh, okay, so they're the characters, here's the backgrounds. We would split it all up. And then we were using an actual pretty old school form of technology called multiplane animation, which nobody really does anymore. Where we built like a huge rig that's like 9 feet tall and 5 feet wide. And it has like 5 or 6 layers of glass on it. And the camera is mounted overhead. So the camera is seeing a view down through the stack of layers of glass shelves. And then we put all of our little bits of animation on those layers. So from the camera's point of view, it all forms like a full, seamless scene. And we can kind of use forced perspective tricks and things like that. And it means that you can animate each one of those layers quite separately. And you can use a lot of real world lighting and stuff in there. You can light things and put layers of atmosphere in these different layers. It effectively does like Photoshop layers, but in real life. And so that's not really that was a technique that was used, like Lotte Reniger did that kind of animation, and early Disney animation used to use it in their cell animations and things. It was a way of kind of compositing these big scenes together, but it's not used so much anymore. And after shooting this, you're like, yeah, there are some restrictions. There's definitely there are some limitations here. It's not like there's a reason why people moved on to other things, but it really added like a lot of atmosphere. And because the trick with doing the paper cutout animation is I call it the shoebox effect. It's very easy for the whole thing to feel very small and flat. And we really wanted to have that sense of depth and kind of mood to things. And because it was going to be a lot of like outdoor landscapes and things like that. So that was the nice thing about having this big rig and having these layers, is that we could really open it up and kind of capture that feeling of looking off into these vistas.
Oh yeah, no, it's still beautiful, even if it is this, well, I don't feel that's quite the right way to say it, but it is beautiful, even though it's a stark landscape. There we go.
Yeah.
You mentioned for the artist, I was curious, did she see some previous works of Neil Gaiman's? Because I must say the character Oran looks kind of a bit like Sandman-ish.
It's interesting. I think she probably she was familiar with Neil's work, so I can only assume she's seen Sandman. What was interesting is that in the art direction, we kept pushing it further away. We're like, okay, he's looking a bit like Sandman. There's things where it's like in the poem, he's described as having dark hair. He's wearing monkish robes. There's certain things. And, later on in the film, there's reasons why he has very pale skin in our film. But it was like, we kept being like, we don't want it to look too much like Sandman. And it was like, we would do that and we're like, okay. And then it would just like, as soon as we started animating and bring it all together, we're like, there he is again. It's like, so, distant cousins.
Yeah, there we go. I was going to say, yeah, they're connected.
One of the things that I think really led to that is that we did one other trick. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do the paper animation again is that on the last film I'd done, I kind of learned a few things like, I want to explore some of these techniques a little bit further and see if I can push it a little more. And one of the things we do is so all of the puppets and most of the bulk of the animation is stop motion. So you move it, frame by frame, and it's kind of like a little puppet that you've rigged up. But we also wanted to do all of our effects animation, so like wind blowing in through someone's hair and things like that, or the robes flapping, or the sail of a ship, with replacement animation. So we actually got a visual effects animator to animate every frame of the hair, and then there's 120 frames of hair that every frame we switch out a little toupee, a little wig, we kind of like switch it in, and so that has that very fluid kind of more like cell animation style to it. And it was fun to try and mix these different techniques. But I think that's where the wild hair came in. And at that point, it's like, okay, maybe this is a little closer to the Sandman. I can see why the comparison gets made.
Yeah. It's one of those it's not so much, but it is kind of there is definitely a resemblance there.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned a couple times now how much work goes into this style of animation. The film's about 8 minutes, a little over under 9 minutes. How long was that entire process of filmmaking to get that short film?
Yeah.
That is so detailed, but there's so much that goes in animation. So how long was that filmmaking process?
We had a pretty slow pre-production stage because, like I said, we did a Kickstarter and then we had to put the team together and build the rig. And there was a lot of research done at that point. And that was when I brought on Josh Mahan, who was the lead animator on it. So that took I think it was a couple of years of just doing all of that stage of it and, figuring out how to adapt the story and those kind of things. Actual shooting time was 9 months, I think, which was I think we'd planned on 6 months and it ended up being 9 months. But it's stop motion animation is it's just slow. It's frame by frame. and you don't do a lot of takes. Like sometimes you get to the end of the day, like we've got to do another take. It's like, well, guess we're back at this one again tomorrow. But yeah, and then the post-production once again that was kind of worked in my spare time. So I did a lot of the visual post-production and brought on an amazing sound designer, John Kassab, who's actually kind of an Oscar award-winning sound designer, and like he really brought a whole nother layer to it. So that was really fun at that point to be able to have the time to explore, the music and the sound and what we could add there. So yeah, I think all up, it was probably like if you put it all together, I would say it was a couple of years of production and post, and then it gets spread out because it's a short film, so not everyone can work on it full time.
So how does it feel then as a filmmaker when it's done, it's out in the world now?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's like the very first time we had a premiere screening at Sydney Film Festival in Australia, and that first time, you're in a group of like 10 other films and you're not sure what order. So you're like waiting for the first time to come up because it's like, is the sound mix okay? Is it going to play properly? Like technical side of things that you're very nervous about. And the other thing that was, it's always interesting. I think as soon as you watch it in front of other people, like I'm so used to the story now that,
right. Yeah.
you're kind of just looking for like small things when you watch it now. But as soon as you watch it in front of a bigger audience, especially if it's in with other animations and things, it's like, wow, this is a strange film. This is a little weird, actually, which I'm happy with. Like that's what attracted me to the film in the first place. But it is a very unconventionally told story, and I think that's one of the things I always notice when I see it screened like amongst a group of films at a film festival or something. The festival circuit's been a little bit challenging because we had like 6 months of doing festivals, and that was really exciting, and we were keen to like meet up in different parts of the world and watch it with the team in different places and do all these things. And then the pandemic happened and all of the festival stuff, like I feel so sorry for all of the festivals. Like it's such a struggle for them. But a lot of them soldiered on, and some of them did like amazing online festivals and really interesting things. But it's definitely been a very different experience of like being in these festivals and you're like, I think we just screened, we got some likes on Instagram, I guess that was it. It's like people people still will take the time to send a message, and we've had some really nice interactions, but it's not the same as kind of walking out of a screening and having people be able to just like have a quick conversation with you about it, or meeting other filmmakers and things. So we've only just been able to go to screenings again in the last couple of months. We just did one in the Brooklyn Film Festival, which was really nice to be back with a group of people again, and that's what I'm really looking forward to. Screening at Comic-Con is going to be great because it's not only, I think it's the first time that Josh, the animator, who's going to be on the panel as well, first time he's seen it in front of an audience. So that'll be interesting. Yeah, and it's also screening, I think, to an audience of people who will really appreciate the film, like people who are interested in Neil's work. And that's one of the challenges, that you go to a big fancy film festival and people will be like, Neil, who is he? Someone I should know about? And it's like, I mean, yes, no, I mean,
yeah, that's true. So, the panel he's mentioning is adapting Neil Gaiman's work, A Backstage View. It's going to be on Saturday, July 23rd at 7 p.m. in room 28DE. Now, you were mentioning being, with an audience. Were there any reactions that surprised you when you first were seeing it with a live audience?
Not so much with like I said, it's been we haven't had the luck of seeing it with that many live audiences. I think the reactions that surprised me the most have been people who either during the Kickstarter or since we sent it out to our backers who have had like a very deep connection to the poem or even to the place. Like some people are like, oh, I'm from the island of Iona. Like,
oh,
this is where I live here. I can't wait for you to make this film. And suddenly there was a point in the Kickstarter where we were like, we're getting quite a few backers who are like, oh yeah, this is my hometown. Like I can't wait to see this film. We're so like, this is a bit more pressure. Yeah. We're like, this is a bit more responsibility than we thought maybe. It's like, we need to do more research and make sure we actually get this right. Because that's one of the interesting things I think about the story is that the way we've interpreted, because it weaves between myth and history and kind of like these retellings of these tales and how they change, is that parts of the film are very mythological in the landscape. Like we felt very free to interpret it like however you would imagine it if you're hearing that story. So it's very dramatic landscapes. But then there's other parts of the story where we wanted it to be very grounded and bring in that element of it being a historical thing. It's like you can actually go to the chapel that these saints built, and it's like, St. Oran is actually buried there. And so we really wanted, because that was a big part of Neil's poem and like what he's doing with that story and the way he tells it, we really wanted to make sure we touched on that. So we did a lot of research to try and like as much as we could, within the constraints of still trying to tell this story through the form of a film, make it feel like it would actually connect. And the thing with like having people be like, well, I live here, I was like, okay, this might get a little, but
So what was their
everyone seems very
feedback
happy with it.
like?
Yeah,
Oh, good.
it's
I was
been
gonna say,
yeah.
what's their feedback like? Those who live there.
Yeah, no, it's all been very, very happy.
Okay.
So we
Yeah.
hopefully we nailed it.
Yeah. Well, you touched upon too the, how it's kind of weird, but that's kind of the nature of poetry of it's a little bit of an unconventional storytelling and tying back in. So it's written and narrated by Neil Gaiman. What was it like working with him?
Yeah, I mean, he's been a huge supporter all the way through. So it's been really good. Like he was very supportive of the Kickstarter and kind of lent his support to that, which was amazing. And that was sort of what got the project happening. And then all the way along, we've been checking in with him, like making sure that, he sees the scripts and the storyboards and the art and everything. So it's been really good because it's definitely, I really like his work and respect his like storytelling. So I'm like, I am a little bit nervous about this. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
I'm now putting my own spin on this thing. And there are some, like, for the most part, I was very, like, I wanted to just tell the story as it's told in the poem. I was like, I don't want to leave anything out. I don't want to change it. But obviously, as you say, there are very different formats. And there are some things in the poem where it's like, you can get away with just talking about that in a poem. But when you have a film, it's like, we need to visually show something. And so I had to make some calls there, like that it does diverge. Like there are, it's a creative interpretation of that tale that is quite different potentially to the poem. But yeah, Neil has been nothing but supportive, and he was very insistent that he would do the voiceover, which I had always heard in my head because like my first experience was him reading it. So I was like, yeah, he's such a good performer of his work that I was like, obviously I want, if he can find the time. So that was great that he was very excited to do that.
And, animation process to voiceover can be a little different across the mediums. Was the animation done and then he was brought in to animate, or did you record first and then animate?
Yeah, so he did his final voiceover recording to the final film, like where it was like the full finished edit. Yeah. And that's in part because with this film, we only have a little bit of lip sync because it's mostly told as like a narration. Because otherwise you do it the other way around where you'd be like, oh, I need to have the recordings in there because we need to actually time it very specifically. But we just used a temp track. So I think there's a recording of his, he's released a recording of it on, I think maybe one of his audiobooks or something. So we had like a temp track where we're like, oh, we can check timing and things. But then the actual final recording that you hear is one that we went and he could watch the film and narrate to the film.
Now, you mentioned how many takes with animation. You don't have a lot. Did you have to do multiple takes with him, or is it just? I think it'd almost be like a fan moment of, okay, that just sounds great. Okay, moving on.
I mean, it is always hard with someone who's like such an expert at their own work. I was unfortunately not able to attend the recording session because we had to like fit in around his schedule. So I was out of the country. But my partner, Kim, who is Kim Bookbinder, who is also a director and very experienced at directing voiceover, I was very lucky that she was able to make it to the studio. So she was able to like do the actual on-set directing. But the main thing that like the approach I usually take is that like you kind of just want variations. So what you'll do is you'll kind of go, oh, we want one where, it's a very straight read. Or we want one that's like, now we want like the scariest version of this, you can tell. Because it's like, I've heard him give readings of it at different times. I'm like, sometimes it is a terrifying story. Sometimes it's kind of like an interesting historical kind of, tale. And so what we would do is we had very clear ideas of like the different kind of moods that we wanted him to nail. And so we would get a couple, and then with the sound designer, we would sit there and we could kind of modulate it then. So we could kind of go, you know what, the second half needs to be scarier. Let's go with the scarier take for that. And we can use the more factual sort of read for the first half or that kind of thing. So it was that's sort of one of the luxuries of doing narration, where it's not like if you're filming live action, you're like, well, we can't cut these two different things together necessarily, but it gives you the freedom to kind of interpret. And that changes a lot as you add in, like as we added in the sound design or the music, you'd be like, oh, we actually need a louder read on this because we've now got we've got some, orchestration behind it. So we actually need a more forceful reading. So we could go to the take that was the more louder one and kind of switch that in. So that was one of the great things about working with such an experienced sound designer, is that John was able to like employ all the tricks to kind of make sure that, because it's like, especially in a short film, you're condensing a lot. Like it's a very dense medium. It's like, this is the length of like one scene in a movie, and we're trying to tell an entire story. And so the score is going from like very atmospheric to very intense to very happy to like, all over the place. So you've got to like try and make sure that everything has its own little moment there to shine. So there's a lot of like weaving together all of these little elements.
And that also kind of feels like it lends to the style of poetry, of how it can just kind of flow through different modes and, emotions too. So how do you feel this final version lands on the scale of scariness or spookiness?
I hope it treads a nice line between. I think there's definitely a couple of moments that they're pretty scary. People, sometimes we send it to festivals and they're like, "Is it kid friendly? Tick this box." And I'm like, "No, I'm going to go no, maybe."
Maybe like the 12 plus,
yeah,
like
I mean,
13
there's a point
yeah.
where kids like to be scared too, so it's
Yeah.
like it's actually probably going to give you nightmares. But there's definitely some creepy stuff happens in there. Like I said, it's a ghost story at its heart.
Yeah.
But I think also, like, as much as there's some very scary things, and the overall theme to me is quite uplifting. Like, I find it a very, like, the actual theme of it is about how, you know, humans think they've got it all worked out a lot of time. You know, you look through history and it's like, oh, we know what's going on, it's this. And then something changes, like, oh, maybe we didn't. And this film, I think, at its heart is like, at a sort of metaphysical level, do we even have the perspective to know what's going on? And it's like, I think what I like about it is it kind of presents this thing of like, maybe need to be okay with being able to change your mind. You know, you need to be able to kind of go, okay, I've now seen things from a different perspective, whether that's a metaphysical viewpoint that is very hard to attain, or whether it's just like changing information in your daily life. It's like, but that thing of being like, how do you respond to that? And that, as you know, I think humankind has always both thought that it knew everything there was to be known, and also is very good at adapting. And so I feel like this is about that tension in a lot of ways. And so for me, that's the sort of overarching theme. As much as it's scary, it's kind of going, hey, being exposed to these things is good, and maybe taking these questions with you is an important part of being an engaging human.
I love that you mentioned that and said that, because there are some, interesting themes. We don't want to spoil anything, but I think if you're watching this now, watch it again after. And I think I'd be curious to see how people feel if that message came across to them, because it's one of those, I feel it can sit with you and kind of like, affect you after you've watched it, which is a great story if it stays with you after the fact. Is there anything else? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say on that, that's one of the things I always think with short films and music videos is that, like, they might be short, but that you should have them in your head for as long as a feature film. It's like you kind of pack a lot in there, so people will keep thinking about it for a long time.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the film?
Not really. Come along to the panel. We're looking forward to screening it, so hopefully people can watch it there. We're also going to do a online release. We're not quite sure at this point, but it'll be sometime in the next couple of months. So if you wanted to check out our website, we'll probably put a mailing list up there or something, like, so people can sign up and get a little alert when we put this online. I think, like you say, like, actually, as much as I've enjoyed screening it in front of people and being at festivals, that an online release, I think, will help with that engaging, like, because I think it's something that it does reward rewatching. And so often that first pass you get of watching it is you're overwhelmed with the visuals and the ghost story and the scary stuff. And it's like, oh, wow, that was a lot. But there's a lot of things that we've tucked away in there, or themes that I think will definitely reward rewatching. So I think it'll be really nice to put it out online where people can kind of like go back and go, wait, hang on, what was that about? What was that scene? Yeah.
And then also, early congrats of it being your first Comic-Con. Oh, that's so exciting.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to expect. Everyone's like, be ready for a lot of people and a lot of amazing things. So
yes, and a lot of walking.
Yeah.
That's the other big.
But no, it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. I've always been very curious. So.
Awesome. Well, wishing you an amazing first Comic-Con experience. That's so. It seems so magical too that you get to go with it's your first time going and you get to go with the film. So yeah, the best of luck, and I hope you have so much fun.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and everyone watching this who's going to Comic-Con, again, I'm going to put in the description, but adapting Neil Gaiman's work, A Backstage View, Saturday, July 23rd at 7 p.m. in room 28DE. And if you're not able to attend Comic-Con, no worries, it will be available digital sometime soon. So stay on the lookout and make sure to follow this amazing human to know more on his projects and things coming out. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me, Jim, and looking forward to how the reaction is for the Comic-Con attendees too.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been great talking.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone, thank you so mumuch for joining us here on FANVERSATION. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up. Don't forget to click that subscribe button. I'm Kari Lane. You can find me everywhere online at Kari D. Lane, and I will be at Comic-Con, so I'll see you there. All right, thank you for watching, and until next time. See ya.
Thanks, everyone.